outline would be the two gospels, the impact of each gospel on the Adventist doctrines, the history of QOD. QOD is an abbreviation for Questions on Doctrine. I'm going to explain about this book, more about this later. Desmond Ford, the brainchild of QOD. Don't worry, if you don't understand anything, don't worry, I'll keep you to speed. I'll explain everything. And then by the time we are done with this presentation, I believe all of us will be brought to speed as to the necessity of this Truth Conference. And you see that these problems, you might not really know these people, you might not really know the book, but it has got an impact that we cannot ignore. So there's actually a gospel confusion in the church, and this is what we are going to explore. So we realize that the overview is that in the Seventh Adventists, like I've said, there are two types of gospels, and some people have used the term the evangelical gospel and the real Adventist gospel. And it's the aim of this study to actually trace the roots in history on where we began and how this actually came about. Okay, so let me just give you a snippet of what we're talking about. So basically, this is the story. In the 1950s, Adventism began a remarkable house cleaning. A number of doctrines which had bothered theological purists for years were given a public funeral. With the rising of the biblical knowledge in the church, as well as increasing contact with evangelical theologians, many Adventists felt embarrassed about some of the doctrines that survived the 19th century. Chief among them were the doctrine of the split atonement, that is to mean that Christ does the sacrificial aspect of the atonement on the cross, and then finally is the atonement that is being done in the most holy place, right? So we became embarrassed with that. And the sinful nature of Christ, Brother Sam is going to discuss more on that. With the publication of the book, Questions on Doctrine, in 1957, both views were repudiated, meaning that we had said no to those views. And we are told the work of clarification progressed to the beginning of the 1970s. By then, the traditional belief in the latter-day perfection had come under attack and seemed to be on the way out. Despite frantic efforts by few vocal defenders of Adventist tradition, the doctrine of the sinful nature of Christ and the human perfectibility in this world were slowly sinking. The weight of biblical evidence had simply overcome what little buoyance was left. By the way, this is a former Adventist who is writing, so don't worry about the quotation so much. But what he's trying to explain is that from the 1950s, remember we started off in, let's say, 1844, right? 1844, we were doing very well. We had so much to learn. 1888 comes in, and we see the Waggoner and John's message comes in, not as a new way of introducing the gospel, because the gospel was there, but it was not so much expressed. And these guys come in to actually give more light to the gospel, and we have the third angel's message in verity. And then off we move. The time we reach somewhere in the 1950s, we now engage in this venture that we're going to discuss, and we see how we ended up compromising our gospel and also brought in a lot of problems in our own church. So we are told with the dawning of the 80s, that is 1980s, the new crisis of unsurpassed magnitude is now confronting the church. What is thought to be the very foundation of Adventism, our sanctuary theology, is coming under close examination. At the same time, the authority of Mrs. White as a crypto-canonical prophet is being reevaluated. So I'm going to show you how this actually has got a basis. I'm sure you've heard questions like, will I be saved if I still eat meat? Is health reform a salvation matter, right? You've heard those questions, right? Grace reform, is it a salvation matter? So people are trying to pick and choose which one is a salvation matter and which one is not. Of course, God will hold you accountable for the light that you have, right? So, and light is progressive, and as much as we receive light, we should be willing to be obedient to it. But these things were being re-evaluated. Okay, with the evangelical courtship of the 1950s, I'm still working for that, it's a little bit long. The Adventist leaders started something, the extent of which they did not anticipate. The traditional Adventist landscape was being radically changed, and as a result, a crisis of identity set in. Today, the very validity of the movement has become under open questions of men. They feel that this is not the church they joined. For example, today we don't hear so much talking about us being a true church. When last did you hear people saying, come to the true church, the Seventh Adventist Church. Do you hear that most of the time? No, we don't hear so much about the investigative judgment. We don't hear so much about the three angels' messages. We don't hear anything, if any, about spirit of prophecy. You know, most people believe in spirit of prophecy are being identified as either offshoots or something else. They are labeled in short. This is the root. So the doctrinal superiority which the evangelists had held out to them now appears to lie in shambles. Remember, in our evangelistic seminars, we start and say, come and join the true church, right? Nowadays in our crusade, do we ever say, come and join the true church? Yes, we are all Christians, you know, yeah, all of us. We are together in this, so don't worry, we're just here to present the gospel, right? Yeah. So this is the problem. But we need to trace the root of this problem. So the problem is very clear. We had it right, but we lost it somewhere. How did we lose it? Are we together thus far? You can say amen. Amen. Okay, so we have the two gospels, right? So I'm just going to lay down the two gospels we have in the Seventh Adventist currently running. So, are you able to see that? Okay, so at the very foundation of each gospel here is the idea that the definition of sin, right? So we can either define sin, or rather sin is defined, some people define it as nature, meaning that you are sinful just by nature, by where you are born in, right? You are born as a sinner, and because you are born as a sinner, sin is literally part of you. And since sin is literally part of you, what would happen to Christ if he has your nature? He has to become a what? A sinner, right? Because if everyone is born a sinner, then it means that when Christ comes to earth, what nature should he carry? According to this gospel, he has to get a sinless nature, because the moment he just becomes human, he's already a sinner. I've heard people say the only thing that you have to do to be a sinner is just to be born. And all of us are very successful at that, right? Right? The only thing you need to become a sinner is what? That's what this gospel is all about. So no matter how much you try, you are sinning even right now. Right now where you are, you're sinning. When you're sleeping, you're sinning. Did you notice that? Because remember, you had your nature with you when you're sleeping, unless you put it aside when you're head to sleep. Right? So what happens? Do we have a clause of probation? Can we have a clause of probation in this gospel? Because a clause of probation demands that we reach a level where it says we have overcome sin. All sins have been what? Overcome, right? Let him who is sinful remain what? Sinful. Let him who is holy remain holy. Meaning that they are holy people, right? But in this gospel, we cannot attain that. So Christ has to assume the sinful, the Adam's and fallen nature. And now, because we are sinners, the only thing, the best that God can offer is only declaration of justification. He can only just say, I treat you as though you have not sinned. No transformation, no overcoming sin, just declaring you righteous, covering you all alone. Some people have said it's like an umbrella. So you're like an umbrella, you're in a black suit and a man with an umbrella. So you're just moving with that umbrella. Right? You're just justified. God just declares you righteous. We're going to discuss more about this. And as a result, you cannot attain moral perfection. We're going to discuss about perfection also. Right? Are you getting the logic? Yes. So sin is a nature. Because it's a nature, Christ himself cannot take that nature. If sin is a nature, right? So Christ has to be exempt. You know, this gospel comes up from the Catholics there. Augustine. And they took actually the logical route. Because sin is nature. That's why they had to go on and do infant baptism. Because you are so defiled, so we need to cleanse you of the sins before you do what? Before you can actually have time to live. Because you might die, that's why they baptize babies. Right? Yeah. On the one side, another side is, and this is the gospel that we hope to expound during this conference, that sin is actually a choice. And since sin is a choice, Christ can actually take a sinful nature, but with a sinless character. It is possible to have what? A sinless character with a sinful what? Nature. Are we okay? And in this gospel, we notice that both justification and sanctification, we're going to discuss that, we are both justified and sanctified, and all are necessary for salvation. And moral perfection is actually possible. Okay. So we notice that the evangelical gospel primarily emphasizes justification, viewing it as imputed righteousness given by faith alone. This perspective suggests that Christ took Adam's pre-fall nature, making him incapable of sinning, so he cannot sin, and believers are seen as righteous in God's eyes regardless of their own actions. So in this gospel, it doesn't matter what you do, as long as you accept Christ as your personal savior, off you are gone. So this gospel is pretty easy. Just stand in the public and say, oh no, I accept Jesus. You are saved. Finished. Salvation now finished. But we realize that the implication of this is that moment, I think the evangelical gospel. For the Adventist gospel, it emphasizes both justification and sanctification. Don't worry about these terms once more, they're going to be discussed. Teaching that Christ took on a fallen human nature and demonstrated a perfect, sinless life through dependence on God. This approach underscores the possibility of the moral perfection for believers and transformative power of the Holy Spirit. And so, the implication of this gospel is that those that believe in sin being a nature, why try at all? Why even think about perfection? Why even think about obedience? Right? So they tend to be low on things like dress, health reform, and that has to do with sanctification, because I'm just justified, right? And also, since Ellen White is pro these things, reforms and Sabbath reform, what do we do with a prophet like that? We have to reject that prophet, right? That prophet has to be undermined. That prophet has to be mocked, isn't it? Because of that. And what do we do with the investigative judgment? Oh no, it was just some error they made in the church wanting to cover their problems, isn't it? So that's the implication that we have. So I've been given you, I hope you have a picture of what we're discussing, right? Do we have the picture? Is it making sense? Okay, so how did we get here? So, we got here through this nice book here. Now this nice book here, if we get it to you to read it, it's a 720 pages book. So if we get it to you to read it, you won't find them talking about, no, Sunday is not the Sabbath, is a Sabbath or something. There's nothing so outrageous about this book. But this book sparked things that later on, it's just like a flame. You know how, what starts a fire? It's a match, right? Just a simple thing, right? This book was like a match which sparked a lot of things because of how we responded to certain things that we asked. So this book was published in 1957. It was republished in 2003 by the Andrew University Press. And this historian here, George Knight, says this book actually easily qualifies to be the most divisive book in the Seventh Adventist Church history. This is our historian. He says it's what? Most divisive book ever published. We are talking a book published to help bring peace between Adventism and conservative Protestantism. Its release brought prolonged alienation and separation with the Adventist faction that grew around it. So we have that book. But where did this book come from? So this is the book that actually led us to the evangelical gospel. And I'm going to discuss how this book came about. So this is how the story begins. So the story begins with this president here, T.E. Andrew. He's the president of the East Pennsylvania Conference, and he's listening to a program on radio on righteousness by faith, done by Dr. Donald Barnhouse. He's the editor of Eternity magazine. He's not an Adventist. So when he's listening to this man, Andrew somehow becomes so, he's interested in what this man is preaching, right? He's interested in what he's listening to. So he sends a note, right? So, oh no, I was happy to hear your presentation. Now this doesn't sound to be so bad nowadays that we are in this Seventh Adventist church, because most of us, we like listening to people that are not Adventists, right? We listen to people that are not Adventists. So, but back then it was a big problem, and it should be, because when we realized that when Adventists came into the scene, it viewed conservative Protestantism as what? As Babylon, right? And the conservative Protestants saw the church as being a cult. So you have got the cult versus Babylon. You see that, right? So these guys don't like each other. So an Adventist listening to a non-Adventist was a phenomenon back then. So this guy is like, oh wow, you are listening to me. So he they started the correspondence. They started, reviewing. So T. Yan was a good Seventh Adventist. Saw it as an opportunity to do what? To evangelize, right? So I failed to understand this president because on one point he liked what Donald Barnhouse is presenting, which is actually the evangelical gospel. But again, he likes the steps to Christ. Have you seen him? Right? It's very undecided because these two gospels are very different, right? And so he sends him steps to Christ. And then Donald Barnhouse wrote, and we thought this is an evangelical, not a Seventh Adventist. And so he sends him steps to Christ. And then Donald Barnhouse wrote, and we thought this is an evangelical, not a Seventh Adventist. How many of us have read steps to Christ? Let's read the book. How many of us like the book? It's not a book that we are scared to give to people, right? If we say we are giving GC, great controversy, it's kind of like, it's scary, right? We are giving great controversy. No, that book talks about the peace and stuff like that. But steps to Christ, very easy to give. No, the gospel is here, right? But this guy wrote actually an article called How to Read Religious Books, and he was reviewing steps to Christ. And listen to what he says. He says what? It is force in all its parts. How this guy said, it is forced in all its parts. It promotes universalism. That's what he said. So this guy says it is forced in all its parts. Steps to Christ. And so when T. Yan sees that, and he actually called Ellen White a founder of a cult. Remember the cult and Babylon thing? Still happening. So Andrew is like, dead man, this thing is going nowhere, right? So she discontinues. She says, no, we are done. I'm not going to discuss this anymore, right? But then the story doesn't end here. Their session ends there, but the story doesn't end here. So in 1954, Barnhouse now appoints a young man to write a book. This young man is Walter Man. He was about 27 at that time. Yeah, a little older than me. Yeah, he was still a young man, and at this very time, he had actually written a book called The Kingdom of the Cults, where the Seventh Adventist was mentioned among the Big Five, which is the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Christian Scientists, the Mormons, Seventh Adventists. Have avoided the other group of people, but they were the Big Five. They were called the Cults, right? So he was commissioned to write this book. So now this guy is supposed to write another book on Adventists, basically just on Adventists. And so the book will be titled The Rise of the Cults. So when this guy is writing, he says, I'm writing this book. And then Barnhouse says, I can give you a plaque, right? There's actually a guy I communicated to, because he says, I want to treat Adventists fairly. He's writing a book, I want to listen to the same Adventists, so they tell me what they believe in, right? And he's like, no, I've got somebody that can link you up to connections. I've got a connection. I want to talk to T. Yan, so he can link you to the Seventh Adventist General Conference members who are going to give you some information on these Adventists, right? So Martin reached out to T. Yan, and he wanted to speak to authoritative Adventists and Adventist literature so that he can treat them fairly, in quotation marks, right? And so their meeting, it is because of this that now this led to a series of studies, because he actually reached out to them, and he was particularly interested in a man called Leroy Fromm. I'm going to discuss him very soon. Because Leroy Fromm had written very big books. How many of us know Leroy Fromm? You know those books, right? You go in the East and the pioneers, you'll find that it's got books like The Prophetic Faith of Our Fathers, where he's actually tracing that what we believe in as Seventh Adventists in terms of prophecy is not just something we invented, right? It is something that has been believed from very old times. So he traces. He's a very good researcher, right? And he also wrote The Conditionalist Faith of Our Fathers, where he explains how we believe in the soul sleep, the nature of man, and very wonderful books. So this guy, remember, he's a researcher, very ambitious, like, wow, I'd love to meet Leroy Fromm, right? So he met these people, and this led to discussions of 1955 and 1956. So Donald Barnhouse and Walter Martin represented the Protestant conservative evangelical. So we have got two people, right? We have got Donald Barnhouse and who? Walter Martin. They are the evangelicals. So from the Adventist side, who do we have? We have Leroy Fromm, leader of the Jesus Ministerial Association. We have We have W.E. Reed, which is the field secretary of the GC. We have George R. Carroll, this one is an evangelical. We have Roy Anderson, which is also a director of GC Ministerial. And these represented the what? The Seventh-day Adventist Church. But left out among those were people like Emil Andreasson, someone calls him Mr. Sunshine himself. He had written a very wonderful book. Please, if you find time, read his books, they're very nice. His popular book, The Sanctuary Service, very interesting. You will find a lot of information that you have maybe probably never found about the sanctuary. Okay. So these are the men. I decided to look for their pictures, Yeah. This is Mr. L.E. From Reed, that's Anderson. These are the guys that represented us. Not invited to the party. These guys. So this is Emma Anderson. He was not invited to the party intentionally because he was an authority for that information, but he wasn't invited here because probably they knew that he would give straight answers. This guy here, I like him because FD Nico. You know why he was left out? He said he was too sharp. He was what? Too sharp. Too sharp. And by the way, one of the evangelicals actually called him one of our ablest apologists. He wrote the book Ellen White and the Critics. He also wrote a book, another book that you wrote, just discussing the Seventh-day Adventists and their critics, something like that. Forgotten the title. But he's one of the best people we've ever had. If you find time, please read his books. It's very nice. Okay. So we noticed that these meetings actually took place for about 18 months, according to Schwartz, Light Bearers of the Remnant. These meetings took about 18 months. Okay. So what was this book, this meeting about? So this meeting was about, Adventists. These evangelicals had questions, right? About Adventists. Remember they are trying to write what? A book. Because they want to treat Adventists what? Fairly. So they proposed a list of questions. That's why it's called Question of Doctrine. It had a lot of titles. This we believe and stuff like that. But finally the name was Question of Doctrine. So they brought questions and were supposed to do what? To answer. So Martin came armed with formidable list of definitely hostile and slanted questions. Most of them drawn from well-known critics of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Among them, the inevitable Ken Wright and the late defector E.B. Jones. Right? So he brought these questions to be answered, right? So the Adventists are supposed to get the questions, and now this was the catch. Based on the answer they would give, they would either classify them as a cult or not. I made the catch. So Babylon is telling this cult to say, you guys, depending on how you answer, you might not be part of the list. It's the temptation, right? Okay. So for starters, how these questions were answered determined whether Barnhouse and Martin would include the Seventh-day Adventists as a cult in their book. These meetings, they gave birth to the book Questions on Doctrine. Based on the Bible, Barnhouse and Martin were representing the fallen churches of Babylon, so it was hard to reconcile, right? So, cult versus Babylon. It was hard to reconcile, isn't it? Yeah. And based on the prophets, we should have known that if we want to explain our doctrine, we can't go to Babylon to tell us whether or not we are Christians or not, right? Because the idea was, are we Christians or are we a cult? And we didn't want the cult label, so now we start compromising. So again, we forgot one thing. When you're dealing with somebody, you have to realize that they are what we call presuppositions, right? So each and every individual that you find, you will notice that they have a basis which they are using to interpret stuff, right? So these guys are coming from a predestination perspective, a Calvinist perspective. So they believe sin is nature. So even when they are coming, whatever they are going to discuss, they believe sin is a nature. They believe Christ took the nature of man before the fall. And they believe Christ was impeccable. That's a very nice word, eh? What? Impeccable. You know what it means? He could not sin. As we believe that he had the possibility to sin, but he didn't sin, right? I hope you won't believe that. I hope so. Yeah, but the Adventist belief is that he had the possibility to sin, but he did not sin. But these guys believe that he doesn't even have any possibility to sin. it's impossible for him to sin. So he came for the show. That's what I've always told people to say. If Christ came for the show, you shouldn't have wasted. The 3 years is too much. Just come for 15 years. Hi guys. Where are the nails? Crucify me real quick. I want to go back to heaven. Right? I mean, why waste your time to live for the 3 years being scolded, being called a bastard, stuff like that? Just tell them, guys, where are the nails? 15 minutes we have here. We are done. I die and go back. Right? So these guys believe Christ is impeccable. So from a Calvinistic perspective, original sin, that is, we have got original sin, Christ having a fallen nature and completed atonement on the cross. So because we are sinful by nature, right? The only that Christ can do is to just testify us, declare us righteous. And at the end of it all, everything was finished on the cross. We are done. Isn't it? But from an Adventist point of view, which is free, we believe sin is a choice. Christ can have a fallen nature with a sinless character, and the atonement was completed. Is not completed on the cross, but is completed at the end of the investigative judgment. So as we believe the cross is the foundation, but then we continue to the holy place, the most holy place, and find it at the end of the investigative judgment. That's the cross of salvation. Are you seeing that? Okay. So what does this book teach? What did it teach? So we asked the questions about what sin is, and this is what this book taught on sin. It says, Adam's sin involved the whole race. By one man sin entered the world, and death by sin, declares the Apostle Paul. The expression by sin shows that he's referring not to the actual individual sins, but rather to the sinful nature which we all inherit from Adam. Did you get that? So sin now is no longer what? A choice. Sin is now a what? Nature. The nature to inherit. So when you say I'm keeping the Sabbath, you're sinning, unless you're keeping the Sabbath. I hear you're sinning right now. You guys are sinning. What are you sinning? Right now you're sinning. If you believe this gospel. And this is what this book taught. That by sin we're not referring to individual acts, but we're referring to sinful nature. And actually this was the revised version of what they had planned to put. Look at what they had planned to put. The original pre-publication statement. They had said Adam's sin involved the whole race. By one man, sin entered the world, and death by sin, declares the Apostle Paul. The expression by sin clearly shows that it is referring not to the actual individual sin, but rather to the what? Original sin. Have you seen them? This is what they had planned to put. Original sin. The sinful nature which we have all inherited from Adam. So again, in the pre-publication statement, they had planned to put original sin. But someone by the name of Raymond Cottrell protested. He said, it's the first time I had ever known that Adventists believe in original sin, at least in the technical sense of it. And so that statement was removed, but the idea remained. We just changed the term. The idea did what? Remained. Okay. And so because of that, we said, by Adam we have all inherited what? A sinful human nature, right? Consequently, we are guilty before what? Before God. We have inherited the sinful nature, and we are condemned for that sinful nature. That is what QOT actually taught. And so Fromm and Company advocated Christ. Okay, so we have discussed about sin. So the idea was that sin is nature, and by that we are guilty. That's what they taught our evangelical friends. What about the nature of Christ? So they have to take a necessary route, right? So the necessary route is that if all of us are sinful just by being born, what about Christ, who was actually also born? He cannot be a human being away from sin, right? He has to become what? Impeccable. He has to take and fallen nature, right? So, Fromm and Company, that's those group, advocated that Christ took and fallen sinless nature. They taught that he took a human nature vicariously, as he took our sins vicariously. They used terms like exempt. No, those vicarious fidelity, something like that. Something Catholic. Yeah. And they use terms like exempt. Are you getting it? So this is what they taught. This is what they taught Barnhouse and Walter Martin. And we're going to discuss more about the nature of Christ. But this was totally opposite of what the church had taught. History proves it. I mean, even the critics of this message that we are preaching today admit that this was actually slanted. Listen to one guy, a historian. He says, can you see this? The red part? Not so much. Sorry. I didn't know there was going to be light. So we are told the book has been, that's his question on doctrine. The book has been, he was commenting on the fact that the book was, remember it was published in 1957, but because of its problematic nature, it was not published. So in 2003, they republished it. By the way, they had an anniversary for this book in 2007. So I'm not creating these things. This is things which are there in the church. You might not just know it, but it's there. It's something which is very much articulated. So we are told Knight had put no punches, especially in exposing the way Leroy Froome and his colleagues were less than transparent in the way they dealt with the long-held consensus that Christ took the nature of man, the post-fall human nature. So this historian is simply saying that these people were actually wrong in what they said, because prior to that, we believe that Christ took the nature of man after the fall. We believe in the sinful nature of Christ. Not the sinful character. Sinful what? Nature of Christ. We believe Christ could take a sinful nature, but still not sin. Even as we have sinful natures and still are not required to sin, or at least we are taught to live, we're supposed to be victorious over sin, isn't it? But these guys, they even supplied the wrong heading, took sinless nature. And this heading, when you go into the estate, you check your SDA Bible commentary 7a, you're going to find where they had this heading, took sinless nature. Just to confuse us. Okay. So, number one, they say sin is what? Is nature. That is keyword detailing us, right? Number two, they tell us Christ took the nature of man when? Before the fall, right? And number three, what do they tell us now about the cross? They will tell us to say more decidedly, the all-sufficient atoning sacrifice of Christ our Lord was offered and completed on the cross. So now we just believe on the cross. It's a reason why when you enter Adventist churches today, you just hear no, on the cross. Nothing wrong with the cross, by the way, right? But the cross is what? Foundation. It's not the end, right? The death of Christ on the cross is as essential as his what? His ministration in the most holy place. In the heavenly sanctuary, he is going to complete what he began when? At the cross. So the cross was the beginning. Without the cross, there is no most holy place. But the cross does not stand without the most holy place. But the evangelical gospel, since everything is finished on the cross, now you have to wait. Christ will come when he wishes. Maybe he's having some, he's just waiting for some clock somewhere here waiting. He's going to come at his own time. Right? So this is what we taught the people, our friends, so that we can be accepted, right? No one. We are discussing a church that faced peer pressure. This is the church at peer pressure. We are facing what? Peer pressure as a church. So when therefore one hears an Adventist say or reads in Adventist literature, even in Ellen White, that Christ is making atonement now. Now these guys have read in Ellen White, right? Because Ellen White says Christ is making an atonement now. But what have they told our friends? They have told us it was finished what? On the cross. So now they have to give us the way of interpreting what? Ellen White. Have you seen what they're doing now? Now they will advise us how we're going to be reading Ellen White. All of us. And M.A. Andreasen refused this and he lost his credentials for that. So when therefore one hears an Adventist say or reads in Adventist literature, even in the writing of Ellen White, that Christ is making an atonement now, it should be understood that we mean simply that Christ is now making an application of the benefits of the sacrificial atonement made on the cross. Have you seen how when we're done decorating it, or even a cake, when you're making a cake, those little things that you put to my toppings, right? That's what they were doing to the sanctuary message. We have already destroyed it now. Like what Christ is doing now is just like to my toppings. It doesn't matter if it is there or not, right? Toppings, right? You can choose what to put. So they just what they're doing. Yeah, you know that what that means, eh? Okay. And it actually says Jesus, our surety, entered the holy place and appeared in the presence of God for us. It was not with the hope of getting something for us. When he went into the most holy place, it is not with the hope of getting anything for us or at some future time, because he had already obtained everything for us on the cross. So whatever he's doing in heaven now is non-salvific. End of the story. That's what we told our friends, so that they can accept us as bona fide Seventh Adventist Christians, right? So number one, let me bring you back to speed. Number one, we told our friends sin is nature. We told our friends Christ took the unfallen nature, Adam's nature before the fall. We told our friends the atonement was finished on the cross. We even diminished our prophet, Ellen White. We simply said she's neither a prophet or a prophetess. She's just the messenger of the Lord. Said she never claimed to be a prophet. She's just the messenger of the Lord, you know. That's what we told our friends. Okay. So this slide is simply saying that this is Julius Nam. He wrote a book on questions on doctrine. He did his PhD on this book. And he says, while else we did not endorse the book as a whole, their view on the atonement has been carried now in the church. Their view has been what? Carried in the church. That's why we don't hear so much. We recently had the quarter on the book of Hebrews. And guess what? It was just the cross. The cross, the cross, the cross. Nothing wrong with the cross, by the way. Don't say I don't like the cross. Very important. But there's another ministry that we are overlooking. Right? Okay. What about the remnant? What did we tell them about the remnant? Now they are coming straight to home. So they asked us a question. Do you think you are the only remnant? Are you Adventists the only remnant that are there? What's the question? What's the answer to that question? If you were there in that conference, what would you have told them? Is the Seventh Adventist the only remnant church? Are you sure? So this is what we told them. We told them we believe that the prophets of Revelation 12:17 points to the experience and the work of the Seventh Adventist Church, but we do not believe that we alone constitute the children of God. They're running away from the question. This question is not about whether or not we are the only children of God. It's about, are you the remnant or not? Simple answer, yes. But now we're going to say, we believe we alone do not constitute this. Right? We're not the only true Christians. We're not asking that question. We are not answering the question. Answer the question. We believe that God has multitude of earnest, faithful, sincere followers. I mean, we all believe that. Right? But the issue is about the remnant. And they went further. Seventh Adventist family believe that there is a precious remnant, a multitude of earnest, sincere believers in every church. So what they simply say that the remnant comprises of all the faithful believers in all the churches. You see why you don't say the remnant nowadays? Even when you have an evangelistic meeting, you can't say you are the remnant church because they are everywhere. Okay, what about this is a slide, you see it, but actually they were communicating to each other to say, from Anderson and Reed, remember those guys I showed you the pictures of, right? They are simply saying they were in agreement. They didn't want to use the term the remnant church. So they said, rather than use the term, we have concluded they're going to use the remnant people. This will be less offensive and more biblically term to use when communicating to evangelicals. The wording which you and I are suggesting to the brethren, which we think gets around the problem very well, right? So we're simply saying, let's use these words. At least they are better. Remnant people, not remnant church. Remnant people, because you can pick from all the churches, right? That's what we told our evangelical friends. Peer pressure. What about Babylon? Now they're coming back to home. Remember, Babylon has come to do what? To visit us. It is in our home. And they're asking, remember, they're on your table, you're having a meal. Then your non-Adventist friend says, so you say we are Babylon, eh? My church is Babylon. What are you going to tell them? And they're having a nice meal, a nice time, right? And they're asking, do you believe we are Babylon? Like, don't worry, don't worry. Don't worry. You're not Babylon. It's someone, but not you. Especially not you, especially that you are here. Maybe we're going to convert them, I don't know. So they asked them, do SDA teach that the members of the various Protestant churches, as well as the Catholic Church, the Catholic, Greek, and Russian Orthodox churches, to be identified with this Babylon, the symbol of apostasy? What's the answer to that question? What's the answer to this question? Do you believe that? If it was a vow, what would you have done? Do you believe that? Or in favor say aye? Okay. Now listen to what our friends, our representatives, our reps, what they told our people. We fully recognize the heartening fact that the host of true followers of Christ are scattered through the various churches of Christendom, including the Roman Catholic Communion. These God clearly recognized as his own. Such do not form Babylon. Really? Such do not what? So there are people that are faithful. They don't form Babylon. Right? Portrayed in the Apocalypse. What is denominated in Scripture as Babylon obviously embraces those who have broken with the spirit and incest of true Christianity. Have you heard how to define Babylon now? Broken with the true spirit. We can't even see that. How do you break with the true spirit? How do we know that you have broken with the true spirit? And have followed the way of apostates. Who are these people? Such are under the censure of heaven. Have we answered the question? No, we haven't. And so the question is that if these people are already Babylon, if these people are already in the church, if they're not in Babylon, why do you even need to call them out? No need to call them, right? No need to preach the second angel's message, isn't it? Have you seen it? So there are basically three views there. Does it really matter? So this slide is simply telling you that once we adopt those, number one is that we are tampering with our core doctrines. Number two, if we believe that the cross is the end of it all, no need of the investigative judgment, no need of the most holy place, everything, just no need of a clause of probation because we are sinful by nature and will never be sinless. Okay. So I'll skip that. Okay. So what were the fallouts of QOD? What happened now? Since this is what we told our friends. So basically we ended up now labeling whoever was faithful. What did we call them? A lunatic fringe. The world eyed the responsibles. Like that's what we called people that were faithful to this. And Emma Andreasen was the one who was the most vocal voice against these messages, and he lost his credentials, and his credentials were actually just restored posthumously after he died. That's when the General Conference actually now voted that his credentials be returned to him. Okay, so basically QOD was trying to mix the two, and this is why now we came up with, that's where we reach, and we have the evangelical gospel coming up now, because now we are trying to meld two things. But this is just a spark. Remember I told you we have this man now. Have you ever heard of this man? Desmond Ford, right? Now Desmond Ford is known for his rejection of 1844. So all of us jumped on, oh, he has rejected 1844. And quite frankly, we dealt with that. We wrote articles, we even organized conferences, but we didn't deal with the real problem. What made this man to reject 1844? It's because his gospel didn't allow him to have 1844. He's actually the best proponent of the QOD gospel. This guy believed in sin being a nature. He believed that we're just justified, declared only. He believed the pre-fall nature of Christ. And then when he took it to his logical conclusion, he simply rejected. No need of 1844. We only saw the roots, but we didn't deal with the problem. And actually we are told that even if we rejected his interpretation of prophecy, we actually took his gospel, and it's being preached almost in every theological seminary where our pastors come from. They learn this gospel and they come, they listen to you speaking about this, like you don't know Greek, you don't know Hebrew, stuff like that. So the roots of evangelical Adventism, that's what we call it now, can certainly be traced to the Adventist scholars who dialogued with Barnhouse and Martin. Now you understand what this means, right? At least after I've explained, at least you get what they're talking about. When QOD repudiated such commonly held traditions as the sinful nature of Christ, the literalistic extremes of the heavenly sanctuary, the writings of Ellen White as an infallible authority, they laid they laid a critical foundation for those who would later carry the torch of this reform movement. The seeds now were watered. The seeds of this movement were sown in the denomination via the book QOD in 1957, and the seed plots were watered by the public ministries of such men as R.A. Anderson, H.M.S. Richards, Sir Edward Heppenstall, Robert Brinsmead, Desmond Ford, Smarts Van Rooyen, and others. And this began to grow, and in 1970 we were rejecting 1844. People were burning Ellen White's books. They had Ellen White books burning parties. We had people coming in and, in a class, Adventist teachers would lead out in a song mocking Ellen White as being a plagiarist. Yeah, people would sing songs mocking Ellen White. People would pastors were burning their books in the courtyard. Just go back, burn their books. People left the church because of the 1970s, because of this same book. That's basically what this man believed. By the way, he was a very persuasive speaker. Yeah, this was his gospel. So where are we now because of this gospel? I'm trying to move fast. First thing is that now we are now warned by the BRI, the Biblical Research Institute of the Seventh Adventist Church. We are warned that we shouldn't be talking about the human nature of Christ. It is divisive. The atonement, divisive. Whatever we're talking about this is divisive. That's what we are warned. And we are told these topics need to be laid aside and not urged upon our people as necessary issues. These are not necessary issues. That's what we are told. We even have this man wrote our quarterly on the book of Hebrews, Felix Cortez. And this is what he believes. Remember, 1 John 1 verse 8. Oh, let me just open one Bible verse because I haven't opened. 1 John 1 verse 8. Let's just open it. Quick exercise. At least I've got a Bible verse also. But I warned you, it's a historical study. 1 John 1 verse 8. If you have found it, just read it. And then you will hear the interpretation from our brother here from the School of Theology. You can open it. You can read it.
If we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us.
Okay? If we say that we have no sin, now our theologian is going to tell us, what does that verse really mean? He says, John also used the word sin in two different senses. In 1 John 1 verse 8, the one we've just read, the expression to have sin is equivalent to possessing what? Sinful character or disposition. Then he says, thus, 1 John 1 verse 8 says that nobody can say that he or she does not have a sinful human nature. Otherwise, they will deceive themselves and make God a liar. So according to Felix Cortez's version of the Bible, it says, if we say we do not have a sinful nature, we make God a liar. Is that what that Bible verse says? Are we sure? This is a stretch of the verse. It is talking about sin, not the sinful nature. But here, where there is sin, you place sinful nature and it destroys everything. This is a proper delineation of the evangelical gospel. So I got this guy because he wrote our quarterly last time, the book of Hebrews. So when we're enjoying that quarterly, this is the man that wrote it. And this is what he believes in. Okay. Okay, he simply says in this same one, he says, we are born in a state of sin. That's what he says. And he continues, he wrote quite a lot. I'm just going to move. We're going to see that. Another scholar says sin is a what? Is a state in which we are born. And we are told without exception, all are born what? Sinners. Straightforward. No need to hide it now. This one just said, without exception, all are born sinners. Okay. This is another scholar. He says, Adventists understand justification to be God's forgiveness for the penalty of sin because Christ paid the penalty. Basically saying justification is just a declaration only. This one says, actually this one was more bold. This is Dennis 14, one of the former dean Andrews University. Says, a proper understanding of the human condition prevents the adoption of teaching that encourages human obedience as a necessary condition for one's salvation. Did you hear that? A proper understanding of human condition prevents adoption of teachings that encourage human obedience as a necessary condition for salvation. So in short now, you don't have to be obedient to be saved. No need of obedience. Salvation just comes whether or not you are obedient. Why does he say that? Because sin is nature. So whatever you do, no need of obedience. Okay, even in Adventist Review, we had something. Because of sin, there will never be a time when one will say they do not need God's justifying grace. No clause of probation, no living without a mediator, because you always have sin till the end of time, to your translation. Okay. This one is simply saying that, these people believe in sanctification, but sanctification is just for evangelism, for you to be with other people, not as a necessary condition for salvation. I know we are tired. We're almost done. Almost done. That's sad. I wish you could see that. Yeah. But basically, that is the NAD youth movement was promoting a book by this man, Renda Brunsma. And Renda Brunsma is this guy. Number one, he supports original sin. He rejects the clause of probation. In his book, in All Humility, saying no to that generation theology. He rejects the clause of probation. The latter rain, the remnant church, he simply says we cannot offer any explanation apart from Ellen White. He can't see it in the Bible. The shaking, he rejects it. Everything. He repudiates everything. And recently, I don't know if some of you saw it, there was a conference. I don't know if I think I have the picture. I hope you'll be able to see it. Okay, this was an event which was organized by Loma Linda University. Adventist and what? Catholicism in a changing world. And he was an invited speaker. And in this, basically, he was just bashing. No, we should throw away the great controversy. That book need not to be there because Catholicism has changed. He said quite a lot of things. Basically, we're building bridges. Remember that quotation? It is what? A backsliding church that does what? That does what? Lessens its distance between what? Itself and the what? And the purpose, isn't it? So we're literally a backsliding church now. So he wrote this book. This man has been writing. I noticed I was reading through the articles. He's been saying this as early as 1999. Simply opposing great controversy, simply saying, Adventist, you guys, you can't be, appreciating the Catholics for their schools, but at the same time you're calling them Antichrist. Let's just find common grounds, right? Yeah. So, my final thoughts. Babylon is what? Babylon is what? Come out of her, my people, is the core. The core is not go in and have doctrinal unity with her. We're not called to go and have doctrinal unity. We're called to do what? To come out of her, and called to call people out of Babylon. So as Adventists, this is what we have brought ourselves, simply because we just wanted to be recognized. This is a sad story. And I hope by the coming presentation, you're going to see how this gospel actually, which was compromised, how it's biblically based, and we should accept this as a true gospel. So, final thoughts. What starts out as an admirable and desirable thing, demonstrating that non-Adventists, that we are legitimate Christians and not a cult, can easily turn into a what? A sellout. Having once tasted the gratifying effects of convincing non-Adventist scholars and others that we are indeed not a cult, the temptation to take a step further become overwhelming. In our dialoguing, we end up making changes that we would never otherwise have made. Our books change. Have our books changed? Yes, they have changed. Because of this, now we do not emphasize as much as we used to emphasize a long time ago about our core doctrines. Our beliefs are modified. Our direction alters. The bright line of distinction between Adventism and the other churches begins to do what? To blur. The sharp focus of the picture of our unique beliefs begin to get dizzy. In place of truth, we substitute emotional experience of brotherly love with our evangelical friends. Our mission suffers, our reason for existence diminishes. That's why nowadays we don't really think we have a reason for existence anymore. We settled down to life in this world, living comfortably alongside our fellow Christians. Of course, we don't give up the Sabbath or the state of the dead or many other fundamentals. In fact, we fancy ourselves that we may fancy ourselves as strengthening our belief systems. Now we can know Hebrew, we can go back to the root word and stuff like that. I mean, right? But in reality, we have lost the life of this unique truth. We have lost our focus and our very calling. Such is the legacy of KOD and the events surrounding its publications. Such is the legacy that some among us want to promote today. Are we repeating history? Have the events of the last 50 years not been sufficient to teach us? God have mercy upon us. So it is the hope of this conference to remove you from this depressed state to a glorious end. May God be with us.